When Israel is pushed to the situation it will be pushed to, of having to believe they mean it, and when every bit of jiggery-pokery behind the scenes runs out, and when the UN and distinguished figures have run out of time, and Iran is about to produce its first bomb, Israel will strike. Every single country, including this one, people from our elegant diplomatic service, people from America, everyone will condemn Israel. Everyone in the Middle East will condemn Israel. And they will go back to their homes and they will say in private, thank God for Israel. The Saudis, the Bahrainis, the Egyptians, the Libyans, the Lebanese, everybody will say thank God they did it, because nobody else would.
I think this wiping Israel off the map language has been grossly distorted and weaponized to imply that Iran is some kind of maniacal, suicidal regime, that the second they have the opportunity, they're going to bomb Israel and incinerate Israel, even knowing that that would mean the incineration of their entire country. For a long time, for many years, all of those Gulf states that we love also didn't recognize Israel. They wouldn't even use the word Israel. They didn't allow Israelis to enter their country. There's always been since 1948, a big pervasive view in that region that Israel is an illegitimate occupying country, that was imposed on the Palestinians, that was imposed on the land. And so, a lot of people in the West also don't believe in Zionism, don't believe in the virtue of having a Jewish supremacist ethno-state in that region, but that doesn't mean they want to obliterate Israel. And I think Iran's behavior over the years is very inconsistent with the idea that there's some kind of completely irrational, aberrational, uniquely destructive power. In fact, the whole strategy that we're using now after bombing Iran is to say to them, look, we know that you act in your enlightened self-interest, and we're telling you it's better for you to come to the negotiating table than for you to attack our forces. So we constantly, and Iran already proved that they're willing to give up their nuclear weapons. This idea that they're hell-bent on destroying Israel with nukes is completely inconsistent with their behavior, despite what they chant.
The part of Hamas that crossed the border on October 7 was trained, funded, and prepared for October 7 by Iran. Iran is a country that has no border with Israel and absolutely no interest in Israel. So why is it spending a double-digit percentage of its GDP on destroying Israel? Just as an analytical diagnostic question, explain. What? It's a huge thing happening in the world. Why is it happening? I think that you have created an academic and intellectual world. I include the American media, most of it, not all of it, obviously, that is a intellectual wasteland. And it is empty and deeply uncurious and convinced everything. It knows everything about everything. It's a religion whose only question is, how should I think morally about this, and not, first, how do I understand it analytically? Even the white part, if take white European Jews of Israel, they conflate them with American Jews and don't understand that American Jews and Ashkenazi Israeli Jews have had the opposite 20th century. American Jews didn't go through the 20th century because they lived in America and were saved by America. But in 1921, Congress closed America's doors with the Emergency Quota Act, and all the rest of the Jews that didn't make it in either died or became Israelis. So leave out for a second the Mizrahim. Just the Ashkenazim. We're literally the last living Jew in the Eastern Hemisphere. What the hell's an anti-Zionist? What's the argument? The argument is what? 7 more million Jews should be dead? We should never have survived? Say it out loud. Or is your argument that there should have been other places we could go when we were fleeing? I agree. There should have been other places. If that's anti-Zionism, is the argument that Jews should have had other options other than Zionism in the 20th century, I'm an anti-Zionist. If that's what anti-Zionism is, it's a goddamn shame that they didn't. Here's the thing. That's a complaint you can take to every human alive except the Israeli Jew. Because every human alive except the Israeli Jew didn't let the Israeli Jews go anywhere else. When America's doors were open, 95% of Jews fleeing Eastern Europe, fleeing 1,300 pogroms, 250,000 dead, fleeing decade after decade after decade of increasingly anti-Semitic laws, pushing Jews out of universities, out of professions, out of areas, entire areas to live. Over those decades, 95% of them chose America. 3% chose other places, 2% became Zionist. It was when the doors shut to everywhere else on earth, America, Canada, Britain, Australia, Brazil, Argentina, France, who didn't pass a quota for immigration at the time. Canada's was zero, a flat zero. It's easy to remember. It's really convenient. Those are the Jews who became Israelis. So, the scale of ignorance, just profound ignorance, is shocking. And the fact is, you should be worried about this war. You should be worried about all the wars. There are thousands of dead kids in Gaza. The numbers Hamas gives are totally made up. They pull them out of whole cloth. They just completely, they don't even pretend to count. But even the best case Israeli numbers, the best case for Israel, the lowest possible death toll for Israel in this moral popularity contest, we're talking about 4,000 dead kids. In other words, there's no question that Gaza should be on the agenda. And it should be moral, and you should be skeptical, and you should come to Israel with demands. But they're amazingly uncurious people who are doing this. I come to them and I say to them, my complaint to you isn't that you're anti-Israel. I had this conversation with some New York Times people. It's that you're uncurious. Right? The part of Hamas that crossed the border on October 7 was trained, funded, and prepared for October 7 by Iran. Iran is a country that has no border with Israel and absolutely no interest in Israel. So why is it spending a double-digit percentage of its GDP on destroying Israel? Just as an analytical diagnostic question, explain. They're not curious about why Hamas would spend 17 years building those tunnels, and why Hamas isn't more worried about Gazan civilian deaths than the Israelis. And so if you, for example, take Zionism, the word Zionism, right? If it has an adjective, it's fake. And what do I mean by fake? I mean my favorite people. I mean my parents and parents-in-law and wife all believe in one version of Zionism that I consider fake. They're okay with this. We've had these debates. But if you meet someone who's a religious Zionist, or you meet someone who's a liberal Zionist, or you meet someone who's a cultural Zionist, or a socialist Zionist, or a British aristocratic Zionist, there used to be those kinds. All these different Zionisms that have an adjective are different elites attempting to interpret the actual lived social history, the lived historical experience of millions of refugees. And so elites tell stories, and usually they're self-serving stories. And so all the versions of Zionism that get books written about them by elites are those versions of Zionism. So if you have a Peter Beinart who writes about his heart is torn asunder because the American liberal dream of Israel turns out to not be the perfect model society that they imagined it was in the 60s. Well, that's an elite, waking up to something not being convenient for a new generation of the same damn elite. None of it was real. Not then, not now. And that's my personal view, why we don't tell that story, because too many elites are telling that story. The fact is, there is nothing else you should learn about Israel other than that refugee experience. And from that refugee experience, you can start to learn other things. For example, you want to talk about the Nakba. I'm doing all the talking. I apologize. My wife laughs at me that this is what happens when I meet polite people. On college campuses, there's this discourse about the Nakba, the disaster that is the 1948 displacement of Palestinians, that is the Palestinians, sort of the founding anchor of their story. And I want to talk about the Nakba because what Palestinians think will profoundly shape the future of my children. What college campus kids think in America won't. And so I want to talk about the Nakba more than they do. Here's the problem. The total death toll of the Nakba is about 8,000 dead, which is a tragedy and it's terrible. It's also the 1940s. With respect, the Palestinian official number is something like 13,000. Western historians generally count it something like 8,000. This is a tragedy and it's important, and the displacement is bigger than the death toll. But who are the soldiers of the IDF in 1948? The soldiers of the IDF are not just survivors. They're not just the children of these refugees. A quarter of the soldiers of the IDF in 1948 are DPs. Who are DPs? DPs are people liberated from the camps, from Buchenwald and Dachau and Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen and all the rest. And a year after the war, are still on German soil in camps, and this time patrolled by the American and British armies. And Truman begs Congress to let down the quotas. There are no more 10 million East European Jews who could flood America's shores. There's this tiny, shrunken remnant suffering typhoid epidemics in the wake of the war after liberation. It's nothing. It's not even 250,000 people. And Congress won't let them in. And 40 governments come to the DP camps. It's in the framework of the International Refugee Organization in 1946. And they interview all the DPs to take them and give them jobs, essentially. And they take all the 400,000 Nazi collaborators from the Baltics, and they take all the Polish Catholics, something like 750,000 DPs in the immediate aftermath of the war, that they all take, and they all get naturalization, they all get citizenship out there in the West. And by 1946, the end of the year, all 250,000 DPs left, every last one is a Jew. And there's one thing those Jews know. Now that the world has seen Auschwitz, we still have nowhere to go. Those DPs are a quarter of the IDF in 1948. They don't know anything, but they know one thing. If they don't have this place, they don't have any place. Now, if we're talking about the social history of that event, I am absolutely sure my country has done things wrong. And if I were to tell you, Noam and Coleman, that your country has done things wrong, you would not fall off a chair. That is not a shock to you. I'm an actual Israeli. I'm not engaged in the moral popularity contest. I think that's kind of a pathetic thing to be running in your head about the rest of the world. But if you don't know the basic social history of real people and their lived experience of the millions, you will not understand anything happening. There's even polls of these people, of the Israelis of 1948, about the fleeing Palestinian refugees. And these polls by the Haganah, Derek Penzlar of Harvard put me onto these polls. I didn't know about them before. This is not knowledge that is impossible to acquire. We just have to put it together. There was a lot of sympathy. And also the one crystal clear understanding that we need this place or we die. And the only thing left in American Jewish memory of that experience of the hundreds of thousands of dead and the millions of fleeing is Fiddler. There's nothing left.